Hi, everybody. This is Will Yafi, the founder and CEO of TIDWIT. And today we have a special guest for this episode of TIDWIT Ecosystem Perspectives. And our guest is Badr Hamdan. It's a pleasure to have you join us, Badr.
That's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Will.
Great. So let me give a quick intro for those who may not know Badr, and then we'll get to, we'll kickstart, I guess, some of the cool questions on your experience within ecosystems. So Badr is the head and director of platform partnerships, as well as the ecosystem GTM strategy at Twilio. Badr's role there is building as well as leading Twilio's global team and GTM strategy within the platform, marketplace, cloud strategic ecosystems such as Google, GCP, Amazon, AWS, Salesforce, Microsoft, Azure, and Facebook. Prior to that, Badr was the founder and chief community officer at Tech Partnerships' ecosystem. And prior to that, he worked at Google as the head of strategic tech partnerships. And of course, I guess he started his career at Cisco as the head of business dev for startups and the alliance ecosystem for ISVs. So Badr, once again, welcome to this episode of TIDWIT Ecosystem Perspectives.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it. And I'm really excited about this conversation. A lot's going on in the channel and the ecosystem, so perfect timing.
You bet, you bet. But I'd like to start before we get into some of the more projecting stuff. I'd love to get kind of some of the background. I mean, you've been going at partnerships for quite a while, and your journey speaks for itself with what I just made. So I'd love to kind of get a little bit of an impression of what got you started and your journey so far, and what really excites you, keeps you going with respect to partnerships.
Yeah, yes, it's funny. Like if you were to have asked me this when I was in college, I would have never imagined being in a BD partnerships role at all. Right? I graduated with a computer engineering degrry. Right, and prior to that, I thought I was going to be a doctor, but long story. That didn't happen. That wasn't going to happen. Yeah, I did computer engineering degree, and all I can imagine was going to IBM and building computers. Right, and I get into IBM, and it was a shock for me. Long story short, I ended up leaving that after 6 months and joining Cisco in an apprentice program where, it was a sales apprentice program, and, you get trained up on sales and engineering, et cetera. And out of that program, we get deployed to the field. And my deployment was in Chicago, in the central area, part of the channel sales team.
Oh.
So it was out of pure luck, pure coincidence that I joined the channel partner world, and I had no idea what that was. Right? I mean, it's just funny. I'll give you a story when my manager in Chicago, and I think the way that he coached me through that journey and that process really kind of helped me shape my career in the future. But I'm like, we didn't get trained on this channel stuff. What is this channel stuff really all about? I mean, I know sales, I know the technology stuff, but channel. He's like, go out there and figure it out, right? And I mean, at a high level, right? Go out there and figure it out. And that was the best coaching advice that I got. But from there, I started, sales channels. I was part of the region here as a channel engineer, focused on our collaboration business. Pivoted over to more of the strategic alliances side, working on, building cross-functional go-to-market strategies with some of our most strategic channel resale partners at Cisco. From there, I moved over to Dubai, and the job there was to kind of help elevate a little bit of the transactional channel that we had, but also I started dabbling into the IoT space, which opened up this new world called ecosystem and ISVs for me. That was really exciting. We ended up launching solutions with ISVs and alliances there, and I came back and I managed a team and a portfolio of startup ISVs for Cisco across the entire architecture stack. And our job was to create go-to-market bridges essentially between, these startup ISVs and our product and our sales motions. After 14 years at Cisco, it was like, all right, maybe I should pivot, and diversify my portfolio a bit. And ended up at Google Cloud, where I was responsible for the data protection ecosystem. And essentially it's, working on the build by partner strategy with our product solution teams, engineering teams, as well as of our ISVs to have a more deliberate go-to-market strategy in place around the ecosystem, grow that, drive co-sell motions with them. But importantly as well is to figure out where in our stack, in the stack, do we fit for, and where the partners, ISVs complement us. So it's been an exciting journey. I've been enjoying the tech partner space, the product partnership space, and I've kind of continued that over to Twilio as well.
It's really interesting because if one looks at your career, you've worked for great channel companies or well-known channel established companies such as Cisco, and you went to ones that were kind of in a startup mode but growing very quickly, like Google. And Google clearly did not come from a channel world because Google was much more on the B2C side, the search part and all that. And then now you're at Twilio, which is kind of, I would say, somewhere in between, in the sense that they are more business orientated, but at the same time, they come from the valley. So how do you see these differences between large and small organizations, startups versus established channel? And, how do they, how do they perceive ecosystems per se? Is it something that they perceive as empowering? Do they perceive them as threatening? I'd love to get, some of your insight from all of these awesome experiences that you've had.
Of course, of course. I think I'll give you a detailed answer in a second, but in a nutshell, I would say it's an evolving approach and strategy that's happening across all of the different companies, honestly. The thought of an ecosystem as a multiplier effect, a thought of an ecosystem to help drive growth and scale for our business is getting more and more accepted, more and more adopted, right? Traditionally, it's been, we all grew up in the, traditional resale channel distribution business. So even at Cisco, that ecosystem role that I was responsible for, and when I was in Dubai as well, it was sort of a new muscle for us, right? We're trying to figure out how best to do this. I mean, the concept of integrations and OEMs have always existed, but driving a co-sell motion, a go-to-market, beyond just product integration at the product PM to PM level, that's been an evolution. I think the biggest surprise I had when I joined Google Cloud was, to your point, right? B2C, and really more of a build it and people come mentality, right? I mean, that's what the Google culture is. And Google Cloud, we were steering the ship as we were building it from a go-to-market and channel and partner standpoint. So that was really interesting because there was a lot of maturity that we needed to go through, a lot of investment that we needed to go through. Again, having that concept of, for example, I mentioned that I was responsible for the build by partner strategy. Having the conversation with product and engineering on the Google side, as well as the product engineering with the ISVs.
Interesting.
In one room, workshopping, whiteboarding, et cetera, right? And figuring out what the joint pricing would be, what should we price this, how should we consume this, and where in the stack do you fit versus where do you, delineate. Those conversations were kind of net new for the most part, especially for the ecosystem I was responsible for, but it's an evolution process. And then you look at us here at Twilio today, it's definitely a muscle that we're growing. Right, we definitely have very, somewhat of a mature consulting, resell, SI business, and we're continuing to expand in that, as well as a technology partnership arm. But a lot of pieces are being built as we speak because we all recognize the value of a broad ecosystem, a partner ecosystem to drive growth and scale ultimately.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think the key word of what you're saying, what I heard you say, is evolving. And the ecosystem space itself, and we're living it at TIDWIT within the enablement of ecosystem space. We see companies across a spectrum of preparedness for all the ecosystem technologies that are coming out. So it's almost like a maturity model that we're going through with some of them. Some of them are much more on the basic side. Some of them are much more ready to go into advanced technologies. But this evolving nature of adoption of ecosystems, be it a paradigm or mental, or be it in the implementation itself, is something that's fascinating. So I have a quick question here: is do you think that this evolving nature or the paradigm is getting the traction within organizations that it should be, or do you think that there's pushback And where is that pushback? Where might be some of that pushback coming from?
Yeah, I think, look, if you look at the traditional channel model, right, it's pretty established, it's pretty known. I mean, it is indirect revenue, but it's revenue that you can actually put your hands around, right, arms around, and you can quantify. When you look at the broader ecosystem, especially when an ISV is integrating with you and you're not necessarily selling their solution on your paper, and it becomes more of an influence sale, that becomes a friction point sometimes, right? How do you quantify an influence deal? You know, and then that opens up another can of worms as far as, attributions and what tools do you use to do that? And do we have the right pipeline discipline together? And is our sales teams, are they actually tagging the partners the right way or not? But it is definitely something that companies are thinking about. I mean, even in my, as the the founder of the Tech Partnerships Ecosystem Club, right? A lot of conversations with a ton of startups, and the startups that I've worked with at Cisco as well as at Google, you see them, at different levels as far as how the ecosystem plays a role into their strategy. And then, the tooling and the process side of it, the governance side of it, is something that's still, I think, as an industry, we have a lot of room to grow, to kind of, really figure out how do we quantify that number? How do we actually drive a better, more cohesive, streamlined engagement as we're selling together? But one point I would say is, look, for startups, especially, I mean, a lot of times, startups don't even think about the partner ecosystem until later on, right? Stage A, maybe stage B. And, one of the things that is worth mentioning and thinking about is, sure, you need to get product market fit. But have you looked at how a technology partnership, an ecosystem, could actually complete your product market fit, where, you're like 60, 70, 80% there, and then the rest comes from the ecosystem because of the, embedded model or integration model or insertion model. So various levels, right? And I think the biggest friction is probably quantifying that value of the ecosystem network that's around. How do you quantify, oh, this partner actually influenced the deal, but I have no transactional dollars coming from that, but they helped influence my deal.
Well, that's fascinating. It's and then, so you mentioned like two angles that I really like. One is the commercial side, which is what you just mentioned, which is like attribution and where did the deal really come from? Because at the end of the day, a lot of technologies that have moved up to the cloud and SaaS, they're getting these deals and you're not necessarily knowing which partners they're coming from, unless they're a reseller partner. But some of the integration partners, et cetera, you're not really quite sure. But you still want to kind of drive, in a way, that commercial business by enabling these partners to do more of what they're doing to bring you more business. And so it's kind of like a catch-22. You don't know where it's coming from, but you get a feel, and you know that your ecosystem is driving business, but you really can't quantify that. I like that part. The other part that I really like, which is, listen, I mean, if you're in the market and you're developing a product and you're maybe 70% there, another reason for an ecosystem to go towards an ecosystem is to help, get you from the 70% or 80% to the finish line. And that gives a role, but also a clear value to what you're doing with your partnerships. Here, I want to kind of move a step forward and like, people talk about the ecosystem, right? So Google has its ecosystem and Apple has its ecosystem and Microsoft has its ecosystem, et cetera, right? But the more ecosystems that have been popping up, now we're talking about networks of ecosystems, right? I mean, this adds a layer of complexity because you're no longer limited to what you have on the inside. But you really want to kind of cross into some of the other ecosystems, or in the very least, interact with partners that may have this multi-ecosystem. You could have a GSI that has one foot on the Microsoft side, on the Amazon side, and on the Google for a multi-cloud kind of offering. How do you see that rolling? How do you see the difficulties? And do organizations realize the importance of networks of ecosystems, or are they still kind of a little bit far behind?
I think the best way to say it is organizations are beginning to realize the value. Some are more mature than others in this, right? And it could be big organizations or smaller kind of organizations or even startups, right? I think the concept is, again, relatively new. If you take a step back and say, looking at your customer's journey from the time they say, oh, I have a business outcome that I'm trying to drive through technology, to the time they get educated and awareness, and then to the time they actually procure, right? That entire customer buying journey is getting touched by different parts of that ecosystem, right? And even as well internally. So as companies begin to see how that engagement model is, my customer is not necessarily waiting for my sales rep to come in and give him that standard pitch deck anymore. And most of the time, just like us as a consumer, right? We as a consumer are going in, Googling whatever, we want to buy this car or this, phone or whatever. And we have a relatively good perspective on what we're trying to buy. And then maybe we just need a little bit more to kind of make that decision. So that influence factor of the customer buying journey is what companies need to start to think about, right? How do I make sure I'm inserted and I'm partnered with the partners that will have that influence on my customer's buying decision from the top of the funnel all the way to the deal closure, as well as to the actual adoption and renewal phase of it, right? How do you actually make sure it's successfully implemented, et cetera? So it's a learning journey, I think, for a lot of corporations, a lot of organizations. We're definitely going through it ourselves as well at Twilio, as well as, when I was at Google. It's a new concept, right, in the industry, where it's how do you bring non-transactional partners into the mix and help quantify the value of that value chain in that buying journey. So it's an interesting space to watch.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. It truly is fascinating. And actually, we were having a similar conversation on that with Jay and some others within the industry. I'm sure you were at the industry event that was just a few weeks ago. This quantification element is becoming one of the key, I guess, metrics that a lot of the organizations are starting to really, as they look more seriously into ecosystems and the platforms that drive those ecosystems, they're looking for that to justify investments. Mm-hmm. I do like one of the elements that you discussed in your career, which is, building that community of tech partnerships, the ecosystem. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that and how, what are some key takeaways about, effective partnering that you've kind of either shared or learned from the community? And what are some resources that you think are key for those within the industry that are really looking to jump into this, into the foray of ecosystems and the platforms around the ecosystems, be they enablement or transactionals or whatever? Sure. I wonder if you could share that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, the Tech Partnership Ecosystem Club, right, on Clubhouse. It was, we have a lot of, again, part of it is where our buyers are being influenced and where we as industry leaders are communicating, collaborating, sharing ideas, with the launch of Clubhouse and the uptick there. I was like, there's nothing around partnerships, our world of partnerships, not the investor and marketing sponsorship kind of stuff, right? Our world of technology partnerships, nothing existed on Clubhouse. And I was getting invited initially, this was at the beginning of this year in January of 2021. I was getting invited on different conversations where they were asking, how do you do this? What's this mean from a partner? What's an alliance? How do you do this from a startup? I'm like, wait, there's a demand here for this kind of conversation. And the unique thing about Clubhouse, and I obviously don't work for Clubhouse, but it's just me as a user, is that it allows this kind of impromptu, serendipitous, kind of conversations. And it was like, hey, let me go create this club and, focus specifically on technology partnerships. And it grew from there, honestly. And then, our friend Jay McBain picked it up as one of the social media channels to follow as well. The idea here is, while it started on Clubhouse, is how do we advocate and evangelize beyond that, right? It's the content that's important to drive this thought leadership around partnerships. One of the things that I continuously point back to, as simple as it may sound, Will, right, is the idea of how do you drive successful partnerships? I wrote an article a few months ago on LinkedIn called My 10 Partnership Commandments.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I stole the idea because I saw my 10 product commandments and my 10 marketing commandments. I'm like, and I Googled like crazy, nothing existed. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put this together. And it's very as simple as it sounds, right? It's 10 partnership commandments that, you know, for the most part, if you follow that kind of framework, that's how you drive a successful partnership. And it starts with being human first and foremost.
Yeah.
I think we sometimes lose sight in business that we are in the people business. And even more so in the sales and the partnership function, right? It's you're dealing with people to actually get your job done. So how do you make sure you do that? And then being intentional about the partnership. And I left trust as the 10th commandment on purpose because I mean, there's a bunch of stuff we're not going to go through it here. I recommend, you know, anybody interested to go and just Google better 10 partnership commandments and you'll see it. The last one was trust. The 10th commandment was trust. And that was intentional because you don't gain trust in a partnership unless it's through merit of actions, right? Through the governance, through the day-to-day tackling, through celebrating the ecosystem, you know, making sure that it's mutually beneficial. So that was the idea and the premise of the Tech Partnerships Alliance, you know, Ecosystem Club. Really just a place for thought leadership conversations. We host, you know, weekly go-to-market discussions with and for startups. We host weekly tech partnerships, headlines, news as well. And it's been an exciting journey just to kind of do that on the side.
I love the fact that it's a community, and I think, you know, there are communities for alliances that have been around, et cetera. But I think the more the merrier, because there's a lot of thirst that we're finding, you know, to learn about some of these emerging trends, and, you know, be it on the paradigm side, you know, but also, you know, down to the technology side. And as an ecosystem, you know, platform ourselves, we, you know, we prefer to have, you know, organizations that are already kind of educated enough as to what exists and what they need, how to prep and all that kind of stuff, because it also helps us. So I love the fact that these communities are coming out, and if we have some of our organizational customers asking us for that, we'll send them your way to be sure.
Yeah, it's been amazing, honestly. Just, you know, it's not even just about a one-way stream. It's you know, sometimes because there's a lot to be figured out, especially in this, you know, decade of ecosystem, you know, per J, right, McVeigh. There's a lot of things that we're trying to figure out. So how do we come together and have an audio vision, you know, just a verbal conversation, you know, with Zoom fatigue and, you know, some people maybe are not as inclined to go and just write posts or reply to posts. So this was another form of communication for our industry, and it's about expanding it from there to just collaborate and help drive this industry moving forward.
I love it. I love it. I'm loving this conversation, but I know that time is off the limit. But I always like to ask our guests about how, you know, we're all techies and we all kind of like sci-fi in one way or another. So I want to pose this question to you, better, which is, how do you see, you know, our industry, the segment of the industry, the ecosystem industry, partner ecosystems? You know, if you want to project it 10 years, and 10 years in tech is a long time, but I'd love for your imagination to roam a little bit and tell us, how do you imagine things changing? You've been at this for well over 10, 15 years yourself. How do you see it rolling out for the next 10 years? If you had to, we won't hold you to account, but I'd love to get some wacky ideas from you as to what you think might happen.
You know, a couple thoughts come to mind. One is, I think as an industry, we are going to get better. We are going to start adopting, and we're going to see a lot more companies and startups and organizations adopt the concept of the influenced ecosystem, right? Influence through an ecosystem. And we will have the right processes and tools and governance in place. I think that stack itself will continue to mature and evolve to help make the operational side of managing an ecosystem, transactional and non-transactional, you know, much more streamlined. I think that's one that I'm very excited to see evolve and evolve quickly. If I were to go, you know, think beyond that, it's again aligning to that buying journey of the customer's journey with me as a vendor, with me as a partner, and allow from a technology perspective, right? Imagine this. I go in and I would like to, I get educated on a specific service from a vendor, from a partner. And I click and it's, it becomes, it's automated, it's all in the cloud and it helps, onboard me quickly. And then that whole kind of life cycle of adopt and renew, all of that starts to get automated, almost like a self-serve, automatically thinking about what the customer is anticipating to do and doing it for them. But more importantly, this ecosystem of ISVs and solutions that help complement my product become part of that value chain where it's a simple click and drag and it's there, auto provisioned. Again, the idea of the cloud was automation and orchestration. How do we go in and build that into the ecosystem, into the marketplaces? Even within our own SaaS offerings, we're opening up that door of the ecosystem. I don't know, beyond that, sci-fi
But I
crazy.
love what you're saying, because in a way, and what I'm hearing is almost your own experience come through your words, because you've seen it done at the B2C level with Google, right? And with those kinds of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
You've also lived the B2B, and you kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you kind of see the differences between the two worlds. But in reality, there is some form of a coalescence that these ecosystems, these ecosystem platforms have to drive, so that the experience of the user on the B2C that they've gotten accustomed to doesn't have to be chopped up in a million pieces within B2B or within business ecosystems, but rather you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the nice experience, but that experience is coming seamlessly, not from a single player on the B2B, because that's not how B2B works. B2B always works within ecosystems, but rather it kind of makes it all a seamless process and delivers it seamlessly to that user. So I love that what you're saying. And in many ways, this is the sort of thing that we're starting to see on the ground with some of the platforms that are happening. One of the things on that we've been involved is on the enablement side is essentially kind of driving this, what we call a partner experience, but driving it from a multi kind of a provisioning perspective, so that if each provider promises the best partner experience to that partner, but that partner has to go to 20 totally different exogenous experiences, that's not much of an experience. A real partner experience, as you're saying in a way, but you said it from a customer perspective, but a real partner experience is one where you have a single way to access all these different resources seamlessly, and that it's provisioned to you when you need it, kind of at when you need it, and in the way that serves you as a partner. So I love that vision, and I think the good news is we're starting to see some of that already happening, although we are at the beginning.
Ways to go still systematic.
Still a lot of
billing systems, right? Disparate systems across the board, different ways of cross, mapping accounts, and it's definitely in a maturing, stack. But it's, again, we want to buy as a B2B, as a business, buyer. They're going to behave more and more like a consumer. Consumers don't like that complexity, neither do businesses, right? So how do we as an ecosystem, as an industry, come together and really enable that type of experience, both for the customer as well as the partner, and measure the impact of that? I think is the other one I think is going to be very important, because it's going to get a lot more wider as an ecosystem moving forward.
Yeah, especially with complex ecosystems where you have many different pieces moving. How do you actually go multi-tier and get the same visibility as if you had gotten with a single step? That's another very interesting, on the metrics. Well, this has been fascinating, Badr. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I thank you so much for this awesome insight, into the past, the present, and where you see the future happening with the ecosystem platform. And to our audience, Badr, if they would like to get a little bit more information about some of the communities that you mentioned, did you want to mention any URL or any Clubhouse, I guess, handle that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Will. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been really fun. I've consolidated a lot of it on my webpage. So badrhamdan.com. You'll get links to the Tech Partner, Ecosystem Club, link to my Twitter as well as my LinkedIn. So it's all there, and as well as links to some of the partners that I am working with on the Tech Partner ecosystem to continue the conversation off of Clubhouse and then from the offline into Clubhouse. So like the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance and the Tech Builders Club, and that continues to expand. So BadrHamdan.com is the place to start and go from there.
Thanks, Badr, and great job. And let's keep the ecosystem segment moving as quickly and as excitedly as it has been. So thank you so much for sharing all your experience.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Take care.